want to do some introductions first. Jessica's giving me a laughing icon. Thanks for that, Jessica. So first is Sharon Crandall, who's been here every week, and she's been running the chat for us. And she is the director of PRISM Restorative Justice. And if you don't know Sharon, I'm sorry about that, because you really should. So here are the things that I find important to know about Sharon, besides the fact that she has mocked me via chat every session of this series that none of you know about, but that's okay. But more importantly, Sharon has been a main volunteer at PRISM Restorative Justice for 11 years. And not like once a week, a couple hours a week, but Sharon's in the county jails 3 days a week, every single week. And she's a volunteer. So that's one thing. The other thing to know is that Sharon's a layperson. And in the Episcopal ecosystem, a layperson that has a giant ministry is rare. And Sharon is one of those rare birds. So she does a lot of work for PRISM behind the scenes and on the front lines. So she knows everything there is to know about jail ministry. And so I'm happy you're here again, as always, Sharon. And then do you want to introduce Sam, or do you want me to?
You can introduce Sam.
Sam Pillsbury is a deacon in the LA Diocese, and I learned just tonight that Sam was ordained in 2006. And get this, 10 deacons were ordained in Riverside at convention when all at once, like a big party. I had no idea such a thing happened. And Sam was one of those people. But Sam has been a volunteer and a deacon at PRISM Restorative Justice, working in the county facilities for 14 years. He did CPE at St. Joseph's in 2006. Did I get that right? Look at me go. So Sam's here with us. He's got a lot of experience to share, and I'm excited about that. And then I'm going to introduce Randy Oglesby. And maybe if you saw our promo, you saw Randy Oglesby. You know, this is like a game show. You guys show up in the spotlight. It's so great. Randy Oglesby here's the thing though about Randy that he will never tell you, but I'm going to out him. He's like a working actor, legitimately. Like every once in a while, my family will be watching a movie and I'll be like, that's Randy. So I'll text him and be like, hey, Randy, were you in Independence Day? Turns out he was. So, but Randy came to Good Samaritan Hospital, I forget how many years ago, just as a layperson. When was it, Randy?
2018.
2018.
Early 2018.
Just showed up on his own accord and took
well,
unit.
At your invitation, Jenna. I did meet with you.
Well, right, but I didn't like you. You found your way there.
I was somewhat vetted, but not very
I understand.
much.
And did 2 full units at Good Samaritan Hospital as a layperson and learned to be a chaplain. And then during the pandemic, and became a volunteer chaplain in the hospital as a layperson. Randy goes to St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood and is really involved in their parish there. But during the pandemic, when all the volunteer services shut down at Good Samaritan Hospital, Randy worked the phones and did phone chaplaincy on the floors because people just couldn't get in. So Randy has a lot of experience. He's going to start just this week as a volunteer chaplain at the Motion Picture Television Retirement Home, which is a really fun endeavor. So we're excited about that. Then the last person on the panel is Jessica Zheng. And you've probably seen Jessica. She's in a lot of our stuff. Jessica is a doctoral student at the University of the West, studying to get her D-Min in Buddhist chaplaincy. She's from China. She has taken way more units of CPE than people should take, and is training to be a lay facilitator. And you're going to start a summer hospital unit at County USC in 6 days. So Jessica's about ready to go down a rabbit hole. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. So the way we're going to structure this is Sharon is going to start and talk a little bit about PRISM ministry. I'll talk about the Center for Lay Chaplaincy, and then we'll take questions. So thanks, Sharon. You go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon, and as Janice said, I serve as a chaplain in the Los Angeles County Jail. I'm primarily in two facilities, which is Men's Central Jail and CRDF, which is the women's facility. Sam serves at Twin Towers, and he'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for those of you who don't know, PRISM Restorative Justice is a ministry of the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, and we provide church services and one-on-one chaplaincy in the LA County Jail. We also do some other classes and things like that. We do like a centering prayer class. I know Sam does all sorts of other classes, not all spiritual classes either. We provide really whatever gifts that we have to offer, we will often try to offer them in the jail, and they're always welcome. In fact, a woman just approached me at church on Sunday and said she would like to teach a gardening class in the jail, which is crazy because they don't have any green space. But we're going to keep talking about it and see what we can do to make it work. And I think it'd be great, even if they were just doing it in little pots. And so that's one of the things as the Episcopal Church in the county jail, we find spirituality in everything that we do. And so we do kind of do these special projects. One of the special projects we've been working on, and many of you have participated in, is donating hygiene for the women in the jail, which we've never been able to do this. Hygiene has always been, kind of contraband for chaplains to bring in. And so we're going to do it as long as we can. And it's only a matter of time before the sheriff's department tells us we can't. So we're going to keep doing it till we can. So Jana had asked me to talk about like a typical day, and that's really difficult because there's no typical day in the LA County Jail. But for the most part, if we do a church service, we'll go to a particular unit, and we do a church service. We provide the bulletin, but our services are very different from what you may experience on Sunday. The liturgy is the same, but we, for the most part, allow inmates to kind of run the service. They do the readings. Typically, we don't have a sermon that's preached. We will have a discussion. And we always say that to the men and women that this service is your service. And so we really allow them to participate, and they love it. It's transformative and joyful. And we always say, once you've experienced worship in the LA County Jail, worship will never be the same for you anywhere else. So that's the one thing we do. And then we provide one-on-one chaplaincy. And so we do that a couple of ways. One way is like I will walk rows in the jail, which is just like going cell to cell, kind of like in a hospital, going room to room. But I go cell to cell, and it's like cold calling. You get to talk to everyone, or people don't want to talk to you. But it's a wonderful way to get to know people in different areas of the jail. The other thing we'll do is we'll respond to requests. It's pretty rare we get a request like someone saying, "Oh, I'm Episcopal, I'd like to see an Episcopal chaplain." But we do get requests based on people who have attended our services and things like that. And that's always an interesting dynamic, because sometimes just to go see one person in one area, it'll take you 35 minutes to get past all the security you need to get through to see that one person. And I think that's why I'm really drawn to walking rows, because it feels like you're using your time better. But everybody's different. And we have some chaplains that only like to go and answer these requests. So we do a lot of different things, like I said. But for the most part, the other thing that I do with my time as a volunteer is really build relationships. We build relationships in the jail in chaplaincy, and oftentimes we maintain those relationships through letter writing after they go to prison, and often keep in touch with them when they get out. And so, like, my husband laughs because if I'm sitting there texting, at 11 o'clock at night, it's because I'm usually texting with some formerly incarcerated person, or on a chat app for someone in prison. And so it's almost like we do chaplaincy in many, many different ways, but it's always based on building these relationships, that some of these relationships we've had for over 10 years, and they become friends and members of your family. And it's just very powerful. But it speaks to the power of chaplaincy, and how relationships and love is really at the core of all of it. So that's it.
Thanks, Sharon. I think where I want to just pick up on that is on the primacy of relationships. There's this axiom in chaplaincy that relationships are primary and everything else is derivative. So part of what's tricky about that is, to be a good chaplain means we have to learn to listen across our own experience into somebody else's life. And that sounds simple, but it's incredibly complicated. Because what goes wrong in pastoral care is not that people don't know what to do, but we all get reactive in multiple ways when we listen across differences. And even when we listen to similarities. So clinical pastoral education is not a traditional classroom. It's not meant to be like going and learning about chaplaincy. It's actually a structured experience by which you do internal reflective work. And it's really learning about ourselves and the ways in which we become unable to listen or unable to be present. So people will also often come in to CPE and they think it's going to be a traditional classroom, and they are surprised to learn that the real work of CPE is to allow ourselves to become disrupted. So I often say that, like, the secret sauce of clinical pastoral education is disequilibrium, putting ourselves in places. Often a CPE class is in a hospital, but sometimes they're in jails. Putting ourselves in these encounters that cause us to get stirred up so we can learn about what keeps us from being able to be present and to listen. And we've heard in this series for the past 5 weeks, people who do chaplaincy in all of these very challenging contexts. And even the port chaplains talked to us about how unpredictable their days were. And a lot of the work of chaplaincy is being present with our own selves and our own reactivity and our own expectations, so we can expand that and be present to others too. So when I was working at Good Sam, a lot of lay people came, like Randy, to take CPE. But traditional CPE is really challenging. It's 400 hours typically in a hospital, and you have to pay tuition. You don't get paid for your time there. So as you can imagine, this is an incredibly privileged space that's only available to a select few. And so we pitched the idea, can we take this really transformative process and make it available to as many people as possible? And so we wrote a grant, and the last 2 years, we've spent time trying to adapt this apparatus so lay people who have jobs and multiple commitments can engage in this transformative work, and eventually in the work of chaplaincy without the demands of certification and professional ministry and all the requirements that come with that. And so that's been a real exciting process for us, to have lay people throughout the diocese engage in helping us develop this asset for the diocese. So that's as much as I'm going to blabber about it. So it might help, Gabe, if you could spotlight people, all the rest of our panel, and then I'm going to pose questions. And so if you don't put any questions in the chat, it's going to be the Jana show. I'm going to ask all the pointed questions. But the first question, and this might be both for you, Sam, and for you, Sharon, maybe talk about the differences as you understand them between hospital chaplaincy and prison chaplaincy, your experience of those two contexts. And in that, Sam, it might be helpful for us to hear you reflect a little on your experience in the jail. Sharon's offered us her perspective. So that's a whole lot I wrapped up in one question.
Sure. So I took CPE in 2006 at St. Joe's in Burbank, and it was your traditional CPE program, which was wonderful and awful,
Right.
And very difficult. And I learned a great deal and grew a great deal. So, I mean, the most important parts of that was, engaging patients in their rooms and listening and learning how to do that. Learning how to pray with people, which you don't really get to do very often outside of this, and which I found extraordinarily attractive. Is like, that's a thing I could do. So I loved that. The jail ministry for me was a long-term process. I had started volunteering in juvenile hall in 2001 and done some other programs in juvenile halls at different times. Never being sure that was what I wanted to do at all. In fact, being fairly sure, well, it was good to do for a little bit, but maybe not so much long term. And I just kept being drawn back. I ended up, been making my living for a long time as a law professor, got a sabbatical, and was in upstate New York and felt the need for doing something. And turns out there was a need at a relatively local prison for a Protestant chaplain, because the Protestant chaplain having had a serious illness in his family. And so I filled in there for a predominantly African-American congregation and fell in love with it even more doing services. Just a little bit about what I do in the Twin Towers, because it is a little different from what Sharon does, because we're different people. And we go in different places. Fundamentally, it's the same. But the Towers is where all of the men with serious mental illness in the county jail system are housed. That population has grown and grown and grown. It's grown in LA County. It's grown across the country. This is part of the mental health crisis of our entire nation. But it's one of the most dramatic places that you can see it. Originally, when I started working there in 2009, most of the Towers was just sort of standard jail population, what they call GP, general population. Today, it is entirely mentally ill and almost entirely what's called HOH, high observation housing. Mostly men who are single-celled with serious mental illness. And that presents its own challenges. And I've had to learn different ways of being a chaplain, because the first thing I learned in hospital was lead with the heart and not the head, which wasn't so easy for a head person like me. Continues to be a challenge. But then with the mentally ill, it's another level. And like I do services sometimes in 141, which is actually a really well-functioning unit, but the guys, a number of them have intellectual disability or other pretty major mental illness. And so you never know what you're going to get. You may get a lot of random questions in the middle. And you never quite know when something is going to hit and when it's going to miss. But there is enormous beauty in that presence there, just like what Sharon talked about. I give a sermon, I give a reflection, I prepare, I do the whole ministry thing, because I don't find discussions there always work so well. Hard to keep them on track in any sense. But, and sometimes they listen and sometimes they don't so much. And we sing, and we do spiritual exercises and we pray. And I feel that there is a gift of chaplaincy here to folks struggling with a variety of mental illness that is a critical piece of what we need to do to address the problem that is way beyond anything about the medical profession or the social work profession or lawyers. Because addressing someone's spirit they're still there, even if they're not talking too rationally, they're still there. And that's critical.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sam. You're speaking to the dignity of the person, no matter where you find them. Thanks for that. So I want to move to Randy and then Jessica, maybe if each of you could share sort of how you found your way to chaplaincy. I said a little bit that you showed up on my doorstep, but you kind of did just show up on the doorstep, Randy. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. Maybe people, I'm curious to hear you talk about what brought you there.
Yeah. Well, I guess I've been going to St. Thomas since 1987, and since about early 2000, I got really involved. I was doing a lot of lay Eucharistic visiting. I ended up serving on the vestry about, I think, 16 out of 20 years there for a while. So I had done a lot in the church, and at the same time, my personal life was changing. I had a young daughter who was going through puberty and about to go to college, etc. And there were stresses and strains in my personal life but at the same time, I wanted to find something more to do to serve my faith. And I talked to an older priest, John Crean, at our church, and he said, well, talk to my wife. John's wife is, I can't think of her name all of a sudden, Jenna.
That's all right.
Anyway, I called her. She said, well, why don't you think about something like chaplaincy? And that led me to Jenna. But in terms of, I guess, spiritually or personally, I was dealing with my own personal suffering. And it raised to me a question about what suffering is and how we address it and how we meet it in ourselves. And I end up at in a CP Classic Good Samaritan Hospital, which had plenty of suffering. There's a psalm, and I never can remember the number, but the psalm goes, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, in whose heart are thy ways, who, when going through the vale of misery, use it for a well, and the pools are filled with water. And I thought, that's just incredibly beautiful. But how do you do that? And how do you, can you be, and as a chaplain, you start thinking, how can my presence be that, or with that, or facilitate that for somebody? And it's a great challenge. And I think, the gift that I hope to bring is to be that presence. And that as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, this sounds awfully abstract, but it's not abstract for me. So I don't know if it communicates well or not.
No, it does two things. One is that I think you're speaking to a universal, that we are all drawn into ministry out of our own experiences of both pain and transformation. Yeah. That there's something of what we know that draws us towards this work. And Sam, you even talked about that you keep, as this person who lives inside his head, right, is drawn back to this place that makes no sense in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit. And I think this is true for all of us, that we ultimately are drawn by our own suffering, as Jessica, the good Buddhist, would remind us. But this, for me, not to preach a little sermon on CPE, but this is, for me, what is so critical about the kind of training that CPE provides. Because the danger is that we are drawn by our own experience and our own suffering to simply enact that on other people, or to seek emotional satisfaction for our own suffering by helping others. And that's the rub, because, or to have our own needs met. So I think what I witnessed in your process, if I may, Randy, in CPE, is this growing awareness of the ways in which what was drawing you into the work. So you were doing it consciously, because that's the difference, right? We're never gonna set aside those things that draw us to the work. The real challenge is, can we bring what is unconsciously happening to our own consciousness? And then our awareness allows us to be present. So we're not being driven by these unconscious forces in our pastoral care. And then the second thing that you talked about was presence. And when you came into CPE, I'm sort of asking if you mind if I share a story that you don't even know what it is. But Randy came into CPE like a very good Episcopalian. He had his prayer book and he had his little pouch of consecrated bread. And he, like, down the halls, man, was going to go. And it took a long time for you and a lot of work for the power of presence to make its home inside your work. And there was one particular encounter that I remember when you were in the ICU and this father was dying and his children were gathered around him and there was nothing to say. Absolutely.
The daughter,
yes.
The daughter was there, and I have two daughters, and the patriarch I turned the corner.
Yeah, but it took that moment of understanding that there are these, that reassurance, fixing, resolving isn't the great power. It's just being present to another person's experience. Sometimes they're suffering, sometimes they're joy. So it sounds abstract to you, but it was a hard-won realization from my position. It took a lot of work and a lot of practicing chaplaincy for that to feel true to you.
I didn't have any preconceived notions about it, though. I mean, I didn't think it was going and praying. I will say it wasn't. That
well,
was
I know,
but it was a tool. To me, that became a tool, and it is still
right.
a value.
No, for sure. But the story's better if it's kind of a caricature of you.
That's right. Yeah, you can caricature. That's fine. I will add one thing. I am an actor, and the experience of acting and being an actor is very much about, we think about, well, I'm out there performing and showing everybody. Well, you're there, but you're being present is what you're being. And I found that my experience as an actor was extremely valuable on a few levels, but one was I wasn't going into a room becomes an improvisation essentially. And I had done a lot of improvisation and I was very comfortable with improvisation. And learning chaplaincy was sort of bringing the two things together, what chaplaincy is, and then the things that I had had a facility for because I studied the craft of acting, which is about listening. It's about being present. It's about being available. And all that was really, really useful as when I entered this work.
Hey, Jessica, we'd like to hear what brought you into chaplaincy. Thanks, Randy.
Sure.
Thank you, Randy. And thanks all of you who share your experience. That's very encouraged. So to answer Jenna's question, I think I'm going to cry. So the way I went to Jenna, because I feel hopeless to the answer I got about who can be chaplain. I spent 3 years in my MDiv program, but all my cohort really get job in California as a Buddhist chaplain, because we are the majority in lots of my cohort are not white American. So in the past 12 years in my department, only 2 students get permanent job in hospital. And I hear so many stories about the Buddhist monks who went to hospital to do their CPE and being asked to take off their robe, the only clothes they have, to buy suit, to act like a professional role to fit in a Christian world. I feel so disappointed. And me, myself, am an immigrant. English is not my first language, especially 3 years ago. I just feel there's no way for me to do that. Then what's the meaning for me to do CPE, right? And one day, my professor, the chair of my department, called me during the pandemic when I was in China. Back home, visit my family, take a class online, and feel so hopeless. And she said, yeah, there's a supervisor. She established a new model of chaplaincy. You should talk with her. So I met Jenna. Instead of just pull out all the information of what kind of standard I should achieve to be a chaplain, Jenna asked me, what do I want to do? And I share my experience that as the clumsy English speaker, bring my portable tea house to the public. And Jenna was so encouraged that just what we want. We want to bring chaplaincy everywhere to everybody. And at that moment, I feel very blessed. Until I joined the first cohort, I met my cohort who were underdocumented, who were former homeless, who didn't even have high school education experience. But are they all cannot be chaplain because they do not have MDiv? So what I really admire Jenna, what she do, she called that, I love this name too, decolonizing chaplaincy. This is what do we need. When Jenna and me and my cohort, we serve people in the untraditional field, Union Station, homeless shower program, public parks, Echo Park, Arcmuther Park, all the crazy places people come in. And we meet people from their daily life. They don't even ever hear a word about chaplaincy or spiritual care. But when people sit down with us, started to share their story, cry or laugh together, this is what do we need, especially after the pandemic. This is the reason I went to Jenna. And now I'm still learning. And I really appreciate Jenna spent the whole 3 years to build the curriculum. Even though it's just a simple word, curriculum, you have no idea how much word behind of that. Each line she put in the data test group 1, group 2, group 3, and always back to adapt and test out again. So now the curriculum from Jenna is already squeezed out all the academic bullshit, I still call that bullshit because it's not for everyone. Sometimes it's just a threshold. Instead of that, every step in the classroom is all about self-growing and understanding. This is the foundation of connect and understand with other people. Talk about myself. 3 years ago, I was very narrowed thinking. I only accept one tradition of Buddhism, which called early Buddhism. Otherwise, I feel, no, it's not Buddha's teaching. Oh, no, you're in the wrong way, even though I was a chaplain with them. But after the training, I established the ability to understand the people who across different culture, across different language and tradition, to speak their language. So I really highly recommend this training to everybody. It's life-changing. I think I shared enough.
So I'm going to just take Jessica everywhere with me and be my PR person. But if you can screen out, right, Jessica's very sweet gratitude towards me, I think, and listen for what I think what you're enthusiastic about is this idea of like democratizing or decolonizing CPE. Is this, it's an idea that's met its time, right? So it resonates in a lot of places, which means that's in the Christian tradition, that's the work of the Spirit, and not my work. We just all participate in that. Because I'm not the only person, right? There's people across the nation who see this need to take chaplaincy and bring it everywhere because it's followed these professional streams of revenue. So it's not just me. It's a movement that's bigger than I am and than all of us are. Gabe has a question. He's noted that all of us have had this like turning point in our story, where chaplaincy seems to reveal itself. Is that what you're asking? And so is there a particular place, like Randy, yours was in the ICU. I mean, it's one of yours. I don't know if anybody else has like a turning point, Sharon, in your chaplaincy where like you sort of understood this was your call or this was your thing, or how you came to know that?
Prior to my work in the jail, I also served as a hospice volunteer for over 10 years. And a lot of that time was on an inpatient unit in an actual Jewish hospice in New York City. And I could tell you the patient, and her name was Helen, and I'd been with her for probably 7 months when she died, and we had a very difficult beginning. Where her family wanted me to see her, but she didn't really want to see me. And so I started seeing her in her home, and she would kick me out of her house. She would lock me out of her house. One time she even laid on the bed and pretended she was dead. And I don't know if you know this, but New York City often has these scaffolds outside of apartment buildings where they go through and check every brick in a building. So they had this scaffolding up outside of her building, and we couldn't get in. The doorman said, "Why don't we send someone up the scaffold?" And she was laying on the bed, and the guy yelled down, in a very New York way, "She's dead." And anyway, called her family. Everybody goes rushing in, and she's not dead. She's just avoiding to see the hospice volunteer. She didn't want to see me, so she was pretending she was dead. So it was this really difficult relationship where the family always wanted me to see her. And so I was caught in between the family and Helen. And so anyway, months later, we actually formed this beautiful relationship. And I still keep in touch with her kids. And so anyway, when she died, I'll never forget this. She looked up at me and she said, "I'm so grateful I met a liberal Christian." And that was it. Those were like her last words. And so, but that was so much a part of our relationship that was challenging. And I asked to get rid of her many times. I kept going back to the volunteer coordinator saying, "Please, I can't go there anymore. It's terrible. I can't do it. I can't do it." And she kept saying, "No, the family wants you to go. The family wants you there." And but then in those last days with Helen, when we were really getting close, we got close days before she died, was when I really knew this was important to me. And it wasn't because I felt like I had some gift, because I knew I didn't. But what it was the relationships. And I was there not because this woman loved me and thought I was great, but I was there because she and I were struggling together. We were wrestling together. And I found that to be really compelling.
As you're talking, I keep searching for this transformational moment in my story in chaplaincy. And I'm just only now aware, sitting here, that my transformational moments are all in CPE, which makes sense to me, right? That this has been my focus and my concern. But mine came at the end of my first unit of CPE. And I tell the story a lot, that I'm not sure what the case study was, but I had this epiphany that I had been telling myself this story, that I was a really intuitive person and I knew what people were up to, and I could read a room, and I knew what people were thinking and feeling. And it occurred to me that this was just an elaborate fantasy that I had been relying on to defend myself. And that I didn't know what people were thinking and feeling. And I had no idea who other people really were. And immediately, like, the world felt like this incredibly vulnerable place, like dangerous almost, but also this incredible, like, wide open miracle. It was just this mystery to be explored. I don't know people. And for me, the real gift of CPE is the sturdiness that I've accumulated by realizing that when someone is angry or activated with me, they're telling me a story about them. There might be something in that for me to reflect on, but I don't have to get disturbed by, have I done something wrong? Am I okay? Do I need to make this better? Suddenly I have this tremendous stability to just listen, even if they're angry at me, to the story that they're telling me about themselves, and to get curious. And I am not the same person I was before I took CPE. Like, I'm not an incredibly stable person now, but any stability I've accumulated has been a result of the deep work that CPE requires. And I think this is what's necessary in chaplaincy. Like, we're describing all of these incredibly difficult spaces to show up for other human beings. It's incredibly difficult. And the story you're telling, Sharon, requires a lot of sturdiness and tenacity to keep your own story separate from the person you're caring for. And that's a lot of work, because we're not socialized to do that. We're socialized to keep things polite and to make sure we don't disrupt anybody's waters, and everyone feels good about what we're doing and they're pleased with us. So, Diane Askren wants to know, and I think maybe this is for you, Sam. How do you form relationships with mentally ill folks, but may push you away? Well, that might be for you too, Sharon. So people who are struggling with mental or behavioral health issues.
Right. So, big question, important question. I'll give a tentative answer because I'm learning all the time. Had a family member some years ago who had an episode of really significant mental illness. And I remember asking another friend who works like in the ER, psych ER in Hollywood, like, how do you do this? Right? How do you talk? And she was supportive, but really didn't give me any advice. And when I started working in the towers, I sort of trying to find reading about this. Is there like a thing about chaplaincy to the mentally ill? And, talk to people. There's no, as far as I know, there's absolutely no guidebook. And the thing, this is odd, and it isn't the whole picture, but one of the things that really helped me was getting a concussion and having post-concussion syndrome for a few years. And it kind of kicked me out of my profession as a law professor, not entirely, but partly. And it slowed me down. And I bonded with the guys in jail in a different way. That's where that line that I used before about, their self is still there. Right. And so that's the most important thing, is just to realize, if you can, to be there and just let it be, because what's going to happen isn't up to you. You're not going to probably find the magic thing to say, although you may find the absolute worst thing to say if you try too hard.
Right.
But I remember one guy that I saw over a number of occasions, and the first time I met him, oh man, was he pissed off. He was so angry, and he was in his single cell, and they hadn't let him out for weeks because he had a really tough tongue on him, and he would say just the worst thing about anybody, and he was just corruption of the department and all these awful things, and his rights are being denied and all this stuff. And it was all I could do to just stand there. He's in his cell, all locked, and he's yelling all this stuff through a closed door. And I just somehow I stuck it out. And we got a little bit of a conversation. And then I sort of said to myself, okay, I'm not going to go back next week and see that guy. I know we'll give it a little break. And so, I'd come back periodically. And over time, we built a really nice relationship. He started to see, he was a black guy and he had a lot of reasons to be pissed off, and I was a white guy. He somehow got out of me that I went to Harvard, and I became Harvard Sam for him. Hey, Harvard Sam. It was like totally embarrassing. But we built a real relationship, and I started to understand what he was going on about, all this stuff about corruption. He actually had some sense to it. He was right about a number of the things he was talking about. And that, he, as he admitted, he's got some anger issues, but not actually, he's not crazy in the usual way. And we built a relationship. And I could go on about that, but that's the story. And what I find is that if you're there with that presence and are willing to be there with a ready compassion, that will at some point be reciprocated, probably. And then you get these guys who say, I really appreciate you coming by, in a way that means to me that he and I have made something happen that otherwise wasn't ever going to happen. And that's the piece that I've really come to learn, is not for me to take that as praise for me, right? They mean it that way. But what it really is about praise for us. Isn't this cool? Isn't this cool that we've had this thing going in jail?
I think often when chaplains are training, the question is not unlike the question you've asked, Diane, which is a tactical question. How do you do this? And it's an understandable question, but your answer is illustrative of that the answer comes back. The better question, or the question for the longer horizon is, well, what are the things that disable me from being present? Because the how-to is a very narrow window. It's only going to work in one particular circumstance. But if I can figure out for myself, what are the contexts in which I have trouble being and remaining present? Now I've got a key, right, that I can sort of unlock myself when I get stuck with multiple people. So a lot of the work in CPE is to figure out when we have trouble being present, under what causes us to do that. I'm aware that we are like a minute from time. So thanks to all of you panel members for my like stilted panelship, and I appreciate your patience, and thank you for sharing your experiences. It was a great variety, so I learned a lot, so I appreciate it. This is our final session. Thank you all for being with us these 5 weeks. It's been great. If you want to learn more about PRISM and the work that Sharon and Sam do, we have information sessions every month. You can find where to sign up on our website. You're welcome to join us and to come learn more about it, or about CPE for lay people. So Gabe's going to send out the recap. He just reminded us. So thanks a lot for being here tonight. We are done on time. Thank you.